the bottle on a woman, trying to keep my body warm. I just kept moving, just kept moving, just kept moving on, moving, just kept moving, till everything was gone. Moving on, moving till everything was gone. Everything was gone. Let's not fight it anymore. Unpack the bags and close the door. I'll never leave you. Though you lied right from the start, I can't convince my stupid heart not to believe you. Well, you've got two good men strung out, and there's not the slightest doubt that other men have loved you before. Girl, and you work your thing so well, I'll dream of heaven and live in hell till I can't take it anymore. If I had 1 ounce of pride, I'd stand up or step aside. But girl, I love you, so I'll accept the crumbs you drop, 'cause I'm a fool and I can't stop or rise above you. Let him speak up for himself. I speak for me and no one else, 'cause I'm a beggar knocking on your door. Girl, and you work your thing so well, I'll dream of heaven and live in hell till I can't take it anymore. I'm too far gone to turn around, to lift myself up off the ground and start all over. Now here I must win or lose. No matter which one you may choose, you'll be in clover. Know that you will. While you're making up your mind, I'll be praying all the time, praying that you won't be letting me go. Girl, and you work your thing so well, I'll dream of heaven and live in hell till I can't take it anymore. Oh, you work your thing so well, I'll dream of heaven and live in hell till I just can't take it anymore, no. Till I just can't take it anymore. Oh, but I want you to just keep on working it, baby. Yeah, just keep on working it, and working it, and working it, working it, working it. Oh. I don't want you to stop nothing, baby. Yeah. next to you gives me pleasure. You always make me glad I'm a man. You're reaching a part of me that no other woman can. But there's always something missing after the loving is through. What I'm really needing most, I'm not getting from you. You gave me your loving, now give me your heart. How can we be this close, yet so far apart? You're giving me pleasure, but you mix it with pain. Still I keep coming back over and over again. I've been trying to reach you, that someone who's locked up inside.
Jesus said, I am the resurrection and I am the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I hold the keys of hell and death. And because I live, you shall live also. Well, friends, we have gathered here to praise God and to witness to our faith as we celebrate the life of Ken Matthews. We come together in grief, acknowledging our human loss. May God grant us grace that in pain we may find comfort, in sorrow, hope, and in death, resurrection. You hear these words of hope. Isaiah 40:28-31 says this: Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths will grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. And then the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and your mercy poured out on our lives. And Father, today we thank you for Ken and the impact that he made on so many people during his time on this earth. And as we gather here today to celebrate his life, we ask for your presence to be with us. Give us your comfort, hope, and a peace that passes all understanding. In Jesus' name, amen.
sweet the sound, amazing love, now flowing down from hands and feet that were nailed to a tree, as grace blows down and covers me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, amazing love, now flowing down from hands and feet that were nailed to a tree, as grace blows down and covers me. It covers me. It covers me. It covers me. It covers me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, amazing love, now flowing down from hands and feet that were nailed to a tree, as grace blows down and covers me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, amazing love, now flowing down from hands and feet that were nailed to a tree, as grace blows down and covers me. It covers me. It covers me. It covers me. And covers me.
Thank you, Juliana. Ken loved to hear her play the piano and sing. And I asked her specifically to find something from our tenure here to play and sing. And just perfect. Thank you. Okay. It does my heart good to see you all in the room here right now. It does. Ken would be so thrilled, and I am. And I know his boys are, our boys right here are just ready to say goodbye, Daddy, and you're at peace now, and we're ready to move on. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I loved Kenny Matthews from the night I met him. Okay, some of you know the story behind it. I don't know if I could tell it all in church, but anyway, I loved his voice because when I first saw him, he was singing, and I loved his long hair because he had that long hair when I met him, and my hair was down to my waist. And I loved the leather pants he had on. It wasn't until a little bit later in the evening that I found out that they weren't his leather pants. They belonged to a guy named Jim Fitzgerald, who was playing organ. And then the boots. He had on some cool boots, and little did I know that he had to take those off and give them to Gerald Fleming. So he had come over from University of Alabama, and he would just fly in or drive in and go play. He was the lead singer of that band, and I was dancing with my brother's roommate, not Richard, but the older brother, who happened to be the one that booked the band into the club. And I didn't have a boyfriend, so my brother's roommate was there to make sure that nobody messed with me. So I danced with him. So little did I know that Kenny was watching me dance, and I was watching him sing. And before the night was over, we met in the hallway, or the aisle, whatever, and we just very simply clicked and said, "Oh, hey, how are you?" And he had me rolling up chords when the night was over. He learned. I loved him more when I met all of his friends. Not all of his friends, but a lot of his friends. Musicians, Mobile friends, and the easy way that they had a hilarious rapport. That's about all I can say, is they kept me laughing. And I loved riding up Peachtree Road in the back seat of an old convertible Cadillac driven by Jim Fitzgerald. I loved Kenny and George Mills trying to outdo each other with their wit and their vocals. And I loved when Kenny would pull out his guitar and sing and play to me. He would sing Rock and Roll Woman, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, The Boxer, Sweet Melissa, all good stuff. I loved when he took me up to Lookout Mountain in his 67, I think it was, I might be generous with that, white Volkswagen Bug with bad brakes. Yeah, okay. That may have been the thing that set me back a little bit, but I loved when he took me to Dauphin Island and told me all about his surfing days, because he did have pictures of him with his surfboard on the top of his car. And it was one of those big long boards too. And I know there's some old musician buddies here in the room, and Stanley Clark was one that played with him, and I met Stanley Clark that day on Dauphin Island. I loved going to the little White House in Mobile to meet Jerry Arnold. And the stories never quit with Jerry Arnold. And Jerry, thank you for being here. Jerry was there for him at the end, too, when he left Dauphin Island, so that connection never stopped. He took me to Johnny's Smokehouse. Does anybody know Johnny's Smokehouse? Just over the Mississippi line. And I understand that straight shot, was it Highway 90, I think it was, to Johnny's Smokehouse, was a pretty hot trail back in the day. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. I accepted a job. I'm going to have to skip so much that's funny, but I'm just giving you an overview here. I accepted a job. I was working with Avis Rent-A-Car at the time, and I accepted a job in New York City. And with the job came a red Dodge Polaris station wagon. Well, about that time, Kenny asked me to marry him. Now, was it me or was it the red car? I don't know. The free car with all the gas we could get from Avis. That was a pretty good perk. I did not say yes. It was a little quick. It was a little quick. And he told me, well, I'm going to Pensacola. There's a band that wants me to play with them. It was Piranha. And they were playing at a place called Abe's 506 Club. And he said, if and when I decided to say yes, that I could call him. Well, I have to say, living in New York City by myself, and started thinking about what a good man he was and how much in love I was with him. It wasn't long before I made my decision. I went down to the payphone under the subway and called. This was in the evening, and I called him at Abe's 506 Club in Pensacola. When they got him to the phone, I said, I want to marry you. And he said, I'll be on the first Delta flight out of Pensacola into LaGuardia in the morning. And he was. And I picked him up early in the morning. I think he took the 6 a.m. flight out of Pensacola. When we walked down the aisle at Rhema Baptist Church in Palmetto, Georgia, Susan, sitting right back here, was my matron of honor. And she was married to my cousin already, so they drove down from Atlanta, and that surprised the heck out of me, but I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. And yes, I appreciate it. I knew when I married Kenny that my life would never be ho-hum. And we drove that red Dodge Polaris station wagon, loaded down with shower gifts and things, back to New York City, and we lived in Greenwich Village, the West Village. How much I loved walking those streets with him and taking the subway with him, walking through Washington Square Park, hanging out there, and walking through Central Park. It was idyllic. It was. This is like 1973. And it was a special time to be there. While I was working, he was exploring the jazz clubs all over the village. The name brand places like the Village Vanguard and all of that. It was cool. He saw some pretty cool acts too. So, when we were in our apartment, we lived over a little French restaurant. That's the first time I knew what garlic really smelled like. And of course, we had no AC, and the restaurant was on the ground floor, and we were the first apartment right over the back of the apartment. We could never afford to eat there. 25 years later, we went back. It had changed names, but we went back and ate there, just as a symbol. In the 4+ years that we lived in New York City, we lived in 4 different apartments in 3 different boroughs, Queens, Manhattan, and the Bronx. Kenny was in 4 different bands and made his first recordings. We were living on the upper side of Manhattan when we found out we were pregnant. And when we decided to have a baby, and it happened almost instantly that we found out I was pregnant. And we found a much cheaper apartment up in the Bronx, and that baby, Mike, was born in the Bronx. And that's hard for a lot of people that know him with his southern drawl that he was actually born in the Bronx. Yeah, he was. The thing about the neighborhood, it was half Irish and half Puerto Rican. The Puerto Ricans thought we were Puerto Rican, and the Irish thought we were Irish. And anyway, it was special. How do I love thee? I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and by candlelight. The following year, we moved back to Georgia, back to Metro Atlanta. And at that point, I loved how Kenny and my good friends connected. Once again, there was competition, who can outdo who, but this time it was riding dirt bikes and slinging mud on each other and trying to kill each other sometimes on dirt bikes, and, black and blue very often. But I love that they connected. Those were great times. It's during that time that Kenny and my family really got close. I have two brothers. Richard is here. He's my younger brother, and I have an older brother that many of you know has had a stroke a few years back and is not able to be here, and he's now in Georgia with us too. But it was good for him to have two brothers that he never had. He's got Sister Judy. And while we were there, our second child, Stephen, Bo, as we call him, was born. And my goodness, my mother and her husband just thought it was the cat's meow to have these two little boys running around on that farm to love on and teach, and it was precious. Kenny was the perfect father too. I was working full-time with Marriott then, and Kenny became a crock pot wizard really quickly, because as soon as I got off, sometimes we had to hand the kids over on the back dock of where I was working, and sometimes, but generally speaking, when I got off from work and got home, then Kenny would go and play, and sometimes till 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning, depending upon where he was playing. If you played in Atlanta back in the early 70s, you had to play all the dives as well. In addition to the hotel lounges, the Ramadas and the Holiday Inns, from Dalton to Macon to Myrtle Beach. It was just wherever the work took you. Kenny was the perfect father for the boys, and he did more than pull his weight while I was working full-time. I was offered another promotion with Marriott, which meant we'd have to move again, and we moved to Tampa, Florida, because Kenny huddled the boys and said, "Where do you want to live?" And they said, "Near the water." Well, we did. Tampa was a great place, and that's where Mike and Bo went through elementary and junior high and high school. While I was at work one day, Kenny called and said, "Guess what? We bought a boat." I was like, "Well, you have a boat?" "No, I mean a big boat." "Where did you get the money to buy a big boat?" He said, "Well, it was an absolute auction, and the weather was horrible, and they cut the price on this 25-foot Sea Ray. It was a big old wooden boat." And he said, "We got it for $5,000. I said, "Where'd you get $5,000? He said, "I charged it." I was like, well, that's probably the best $5,000 that was ever spent, because he and the boys lived on those boats out in the water and just up and down from Tarpon Springs. They were on the water any chance they got. I loved when I got on the boat and I realized that Kenny, who had been in the Coast Guard, he did his term in the Coast Guard Reserves, and he was teaching those boys how to operate and properly care for a boat. So if he knew how to do it, they were going to know how to do it. I think it's also the time when he told them that they needed to start being friends instead of adversaries, because they would one day need each other. And that's what I'm seeing today. They are best friends. They learned many life lessons on that boat, I'm sure. In '93, we moved back up to Metro Atlanta, to Fayetteville. Many of you don't know that Ken became a mortgage broker and a mortgage lender. He was proud that he passed Dun and Bradstreet, because that's what you had to do to be a lender. He also passed the real estate exam and never got his license because he didn't want to do that. He just wanted to know what the realtors knew as a mortgage broker, and he did it well. So he formed the company Starboard Mortgage and did a great job at it. I love when Ken told me that he wanted to visit the Methodist Church in Fayetteville, because his fondest memories as a youngster were of the Methodist Church there. Now, the family didn't go to the Methodist Church. They went to Episcopal, right? Yeah, later, okay. So he felt that that would be a good fit. And then when he took me, I'm like, yeah, I like this. I like the Methodist Church. He was also incredibly proud when Mike decided to become a firefighter. How were you, 20, 21, 18? Mike was a firefighter long before they would hire him, but he knew everything there was to do there. And you're still with the same fire department. How many years later? 30? Okay, that tells you how old I am. 30 years. He was so proud of Bo, although it was hard to take. After 9/11, Bo joined the Marine Corps, and we were really proud, and I was a fearful mom, but Kenny loyally put together the care boxes for Bo and enough for some of the other guys too, and tried to ship one a week. He was so good at that. When the boys had made their own way in the world, we decided that it was time to retire, and instead of going to the mountains where I would love to have lived, we came to Gulf Shores, which is where he wanted to be, back on the water. And we had a tiny little condo, like 500 square feet, and then we bought a tiny little house, those down on the canals that were up on telephone poles at the time. And it took Hurricane Ivan destroying that little house for us to say, okay, we're going to retire there, and we're going to build our retirement home, and we did. And that's when we came back to Gulf Shores for 16 years. Now, Kenny, he stayed out on the lagoon, Little Lagoon, because you go out the canal by the house and then go out into Little Lagoon. And he loved it when Briley came, and Briley was old enough to put in the driver's seat of the boat and, you know, swing around the lagoon. And I learned to catch crabs and clean them, thanks to the folks back here from West 6th Avenue. We were on West 4th, so there was a canal separating us, but we had great friends, and I loved learning how to cook gumbo and crab cakes and all that good stuff. But Kenny kept playing. And he would do a single, he would do a duo, he would play in the band with Joel and Danny from the church here, and kept playing around town until he couldn't play anymore. We visited this church after Hurricane Ivan. It was meeting in the shopping center, and it was there that he ran into one of his old buddies, Barry Gordon, And they met in the aisle going, aren't you Ken Matthews? Barry was his little brother in the fraternity back in the day. And so that was a good connection. Barry would come in handy many years later because Barry's the one that sold him the camper that he moved to Dauphin Island in his final days down here. Ken Matthews was born with a big personality, just like his father, Ken Sr. Many of you know that the last few years of living in Gulf Shores, Kenny was going through medical and other issues. I retired from Marriott, and it became clear that he was facing some mental issues. And we saw many doctors, endured many treatments, none of which was the answer. Little did we know he was experiencing dementia, and that explains many of the reasons that he was not the joyful Ken that you might have first met. His personality changed, and I'll never forget how members of this church embraced us both during that time. There's probably as many of you in here who go to this church that let me cry on your shoulder, or you held my hands, or wiped my tears, and it just goes, there's no way to express how thankful I am. I'll never forget it, how the whole church embraced us both during that time. Clay and Van, you guys listened more than I could imagine. Mavis and Patsy and Mary Teet, who, bless her soul, just passed recently. Kay Nichols, Sherry and Mike, especially back in the back. You guys kept me going. You were counselors and confidants. That's what you were here at this church. And without you, I couldn't have endured. So that erratic behavior we were seeing from Ken was, not him being angry and hurtful. It was him with dementia. And, about that time, COVID hit, and then I went back to Atlanta. I went to Atlanta and lived with Bo and his family, and during that time, we had a precious Leo, and I got to play around with Lennon an awful lot and watch Briley grow into a beautiful young lady. And it's where I needed to be. It's where I needed to heal. And Kenny had parked that camper, the big camper that Barry sold him down off Dauphin Island, and was talking to many people on the phone. He was also getting into trouble, wasn't he, Jerry? Jerry Arnold back there he was there to rescue him sometimes. Thank goodness. Wouldn't have known who else to call. But Mike and Bo came down prepared to get their daddy and take him back, and they did. And they called and said, "Mom, he can't take care of himself." And with the help of their wives and all, they found him a place in memory care. And he had been in memory care for the last 3+ years. And that's where he was when he passed. Without the enduring love of Mike and Bo, I don't know what I would have done, but they visited him weekly. It took a whole family to make that happen, but one day, several times, those two boys said to me, "Mom, you've done enough. You've done all you can for Dad. Take care of yourself now. We've got this." And they did. They did. And Kenny was as proud of a dad as he could be of you two boys and your wives and your children. That's absolutely. The three of us, the two boys and I, were with Ken when he passed, and that's how he would have wanted it. And I think it's worth noting that Bo had set up I don't know if it was a old iPod or what, but it was music playing when Kenny was in the hospice and not just laying. That's all he was doing. He wasn't taking nourishment or anything. And in his final days, he was hearing music. Wilson Pickett, Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, and more. That's what Kenny would have wanted to hear in his last days. So please celebrate Kenny and the full life he lived. Enjoy his music today. If you were here earlier, you only heard him playing music and singing songs that he wrote, with 2 exceptions. And talk about the good times, okay? Because we talked about the sad times plenty enough. Now, I'm going to switch gears. If I had a Bronx accent, it would be perfect, because this came from his friend Zach, who played in the band in New York when we first got there. He said, this is from Zach Stern. He was the drummer in 2 bands that Ken played with. It was around 1972, and the band I was in, looking for a singer, placed an ad in the Village Voice. At that time, it was almost an underground New York Greenwich Village newspaper. We were looking for a lead singer. We then held auditions in the small basement of my parents' house in the Bronx. As one can imagine, all kinds of folks responded, including some pretty wacky characters who somehow thought they could carry a tune. The bandmates had a secret musical riff that when an auditioner was clearly not a good match, that it would be a no-go signal. So one day, this guy swaggered into the Bronx, New York cellar and said, hey y'all, I'm Ken Matthews. And we figured, well, that was gonna be a short audition too. About 5 songs later, we realized that none of us had given the hook signal. This guy could sing, and all types of music, rock, soul, with a great range, and always with a tinge of his own unique style. As it turned out, we still had other singers scheduled for auditions, and we wound up hiring both Kenny and the girl singer named Jeannie. They were wonderful together, and they were. I thought I was on TV, listening to TV with these 2 people singing. They were just amazing. When they combined on duets, it was perfect. Well, this was a relatively short-lived version of the band. What Zach didn't know is that we went on the road, and I traveled with him on the road to places like the Catskills, upstate New York, to the east coast of the U.S., down to Fort Walton Beach. Bacon's by the Sea was one of the places we ended up for a good while. And then we decided to go back to New York. And when we did, we lived in an apartment right across the hall from Zach and Terry. Terry happened to be a pediatric nurse at the hospital where Mike was born, and I knocked on that door so many times. I didn't, Kenny did. And Kenny would knock on the door and say, can you come bathe our baby? Can you come tell me what I need to do? Can you come show us how to do this? There are so many moments that we had with them, and it was special. I was telling somebody this morning that we had Mike when he was 12 days old. He was sleeping in a drawer that Terry pulled out of a dresser in the band house out on Long Island in the Hamptons. And the band was playing at a place called the Bordy Barn. And of course, when Kenny and I heard him say that, it sounded like the Bordy Barn. We didn't know what it was until we got out there, and they had a little t-shirt made, one of those little stretchy hospital white t-shirts. with the boardy barn on the front of it for Mike. One last story. Kenny was always having fun with the language and all, but Zach and Terry, Mr. Brennan was Terry's father, and they were first generation in the U.S. And when he would stand down on the corner, Mr. Brennan would, and Kenny would go down and chat with him, and Mr. Brennan would chat with Kenny, and then they'd part and go their ways. And Terry's mom said, "You know, Daddy thinks your friend Kenny's a wonderful young man, but he can't understand a single word he says." Well, Kenny would come tell me, "I love Mr. Brennan, and boy, Mrs. Brennan gave me this gingerbread. I love talking to Mr. Brennan, but he doesn't understand. I don't understand a single word he says." So here were these two guys standing on the corner in the Bronx, enjoying each other. And Kenny would be driving a cab. He drove a cab in New York too, so he did a lot of things. He drove a cab. He pushed garment racks down through the fashion district. I can't even begin to tell you things he would do, whatever he could do to make enough money, because he was a father. He knew he had to have enough money to take care of the family. And so at one point he bought a 1965 Chevy Impala. It was all beat up, and the stuffing was coming out of the seats in the back. I think he paid $250 for it, and that was because he did not want me riding the subway or the bus to get to the doctor when I was pregnant. And he drove it when we moved back to Georgia the next year. And he drove it and he sold it to a guy for $250 as soon as we got there. So that's New York, that's me. I see some faces in the back. Is there somebody who promised me they were going to speak? I think there's Jerry Powell back in the back. Does anybody remember Jerry Powell from playing at the Tin Top a few years back or back in the day? Come on up, Jerry. You can take over from me.
I got a message from my old buddy and Ken's old buddy, George Britt. He's a doctor now. George played trumpet years ago, and he got in touch with me last week and said that Kenny was not doing well through a mutual friend of his and Kenny's that let him know, because I had tried to find out how everything was, but he let me know that Ken had moved on, and it was a very painful thing to hear. We lose so many people over the years, and they're all difficult, but this one was, it just struck me, very hard. And when Carol asked me if I would say a few words, I was very honored and happy to. My name is Jerry Powell, and I know that because I looked on my driver's license before I came up here. Ken would appreciate that. He and I shared a kind of a sick, I won't say sick, but a twisted sense of humor. And that's to add a little bit of levity to this. And Carol I thoroughly enjoyed what she said and shared with us, because it was an uplifting message. And so thank you, and thank you, Reverend, and thank you for the beautiful song there. I'll be brief. I tend to ramble, but I brought my sheet that keeps me on track so I don't get too far off. I promise we'll all be out here by 4:30. So, no, honestly, as I said, I'm Jerry Powell, and I have actually been in the music business since 1962. I know I don't look a day over 90, but me and George Brett and George Brett and of course George Mills, who you mentioned. I don't know if George is here today, but I didn't see him. I haven't seen George in a while, but we all started in Mobile in a place called Johnson's Lake. You know, if you could play an instrument and you thought you had some talent, they would hire you and you could come there. It's where a lot of bands got their start. And my band back then did rockabilly music, and a year later we ended up as 7 pieces playing New Orleans and Memphis and Muscle Shoals type R&B, Wilson Pickett, and all that stuff, because that's what everybody in high school wanted to hear at the time. Now, Ken was 4 years behind me, and of course when you're a teenager, even 2 years difference makes it, it's a big difference. So I really did not get to know him. He ended up playing with my old group after I had left and gone into service, and I hear stories about him, so I felt like I knew him from those stories I would hear through mutual friends. And I was at a club called the Dixie Club. That was a big popular place in Mobile. Forgive me, Reverend. And we on the weekends would have bands that would play opposite us on an alternate stage. I was with a group called the Dalton Boys, and anyway, Ken was there with a group he was singing with, Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, and I finally got to meet him face to face, and I would sit, while they were playing, I would sit and just listen, and I was amazed at his voice, and of course he played trumpet too. Just a very talented guy. We didn't get to talk much because we were hardly ever, seeing each other than maybe at the end of the night or at the first of the night. But it always impressed me how talented he was. And then a couple of years later, I think Carol and Ken and I, we all talked about this before, but I was on the road with a group, and we worked the downtown Atlanta Marriott and the Royal Coach in Atlanta and the St. Louis Marriott. We traveled all over. And it's ironic that we didn't cross paths. I guess y'all were in New York at the time. But when I came off the road, I formed a group called Carnival, and I was at the bank one day. We had just signed 2.5 years worth of contracts, which was unheard of with a hotel chain, and I was at the bank cashing a check, and this lady who was a teller said, do you play? And I said, yeah, yes, ma'am. And she said, do you ever heard of a guy named Ken Matthews? And I said, Lord, yeah, he's an old friend. And she said, well, that's my son. And she said, he's got some recordings. I said, boy, I would love to hear those. I was really sincere. And the next thing I know, she says, somebody take over my spot here. So we went out to her car, and she put in a cassette. This was after the 8-track days. So anyway, and we sat there and I listened, and I was just blown away. I told her, I said, I'm not really surprised, but this is just great. And you heard some of that today. Just an amazing talent. And she and Ken Sr. would end up, we were there 6 or 7 years playing at that hotel, and they were pretty semi-regulars there, and we got to be great friends. We really did. And just wonderful people. And then I'll fast forward here, like I say, this is keeping me on track. Don't nobody go to sleep, I'm close. But in 2019, my timing was impeccable. I released my first CD after many years of writing songs. I released my first CD, and so I went on Fox 10 to promote the release party, which was going to be at Butch Cassidy's over there in Mobile. Kind of a nice spot there. I played on Tuesday nights, and the first call I got after being on TV was from my old friend Kenny Matthews. And he told me he was working out at the gym and he saw the show, and we had a great talk. He was very complimentary, which meant a great deal to me. And he asked for a CD. He wanted to buy one. I said, your money's no good here, so I sent him a couple. And he would call me from time to time, and we would talk about the songs and all that. And I kept encouraging him to record some more. You know, the music business has always been something, it's an art form, but if you have no guarantees of success. You know, that's the irony of it. The most talented people I've ever known are not household words all across the country. And if you go to medical school or law school or anything like that, you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to make a living, you know, at it. Music is another story. There are no guarantees, and you can make a living at it, and that's a blessing. And a lot of people can't do that. But as far as being a household word and selling 10 million records, that's the only very small percentage of people. And it's a combination of luck and different things, and talent, and who you know, and the old story about that. But at any rate, I encouraged him to do what I did. You know, after all these years, I ran a studio for 17 years. My job was to be the designated nitpicker, because if the people that recorded and paid me to record, if they didn't have a producer and they were singing flat or something, I would have to, you know, I would feel like, well, maybe I need to tell them, you know, mention it to them, you know, and if they didn't want to do anything about it and they were happy with it, that was fine with me, because the customer's always right. And I always thought, I never got to record Ken Matthews, but if I had, he would have made my job so much easier, because he would have probably hit it first or second take, which is unprecedented. But at any rate, as the time went on and Ken ended up moving, he would call me from time to time and we would talk, and we actually got to be better friends on the phone, because we spent more time like that together on the phone than in person. And I do remember that Carol and Ken, when I saw them at Robertsdale, there was a Greer's grand opening or a dedication, and one of my high moments in life was that Ken came down and he brought his stuff, and he and I played together on that gig, and we got to sing the national anthem together. Totally unrehearsed, but it was quite a moment, and that was such an honor for me, because he had such a voice, and such a talent. And so one day he would send me messages. Now this is, Carol, I can't believe it's been 3 years ago that he left the island, but time does just get away from you. But he sent me a message, and he said, and it was a sign, it was a portable sign. He had taken a photo of it, and it said, "No matter how big or bad you think you are, when a 2-year-old hands you a toy phone, you talk on it." And that was very revealing, because that came from the heart, the fact that he would send that to me. And shortly after that, I tried to find out through mutual friends if he was okay, because he just kind of dropped off the radar. And I had sent Bob and Patty, who owns the Tin Top, a letter and said, do you know anything about Ken Matthews? I got the letter back a month later. Even though I had the address the way it's listed, it said no undeliverable at this address or something. So at any rate, the next thing I hear was from my friend George Britt, and very sobering news. That was before Kenny passed, but he said, you know, he's in a place, and they're taking care of him. So I want to tell Bo and Mike how much it means that you stepped up. I know it wasn't anything you were forced to do. You did it out of love and dedication. He would have done it for you, and to look after him in his last days, and of course for Carol for being there for him too. The last thing I'll say is the sport coat here. You're probably saying, what does that have to do with it? My wife bought this for me in 1985. You can probably say, yeah, it looks like it's from that era. But I've used this thing for TV commercials, funerals. I have worn it to do the sunrise service at the Grand Hotel numerous years, all kind of functions. But I noticed that it kept getting heavier, or it felt like it was heavier. And one day I looked, I've even got it now since I cleaned it out, but no wonder it was so heavy. There must have been that many funeral notices and handouts in each of these 3 pockets. And so I took it out one day, and I said, no wonder this thing is so cumbersome and heavy. I laid them out on the bed and just looked at them, and it went on back to 1987, my grandmother, when she passed away in Huntsville. And I thought, all these folks, are gone. And it's a sobering thing because, time kind of dulls the edge, and you never get over losing somebody. It just leaves an empty spot, but you go on, because where we are here in this realm, this is not the destination. This is a journey. And it's a tough journey sometimes. Looking at the weather out there today, I thought, boy, it's stormy weather, and it kind of reminded me of the storms that we go through in life. So at any rate, looking at those things, and I look at them again, I just happened to notice while I was sitting there, while Carol was speaking earlier, there's 4 or 5 here that I had forgotten about, new ones. And at any rate, it reminds me to get up every day and thank God for every breath, every heartbeat, every moment, and to make the most of it. And if I could give anyone advice, that's to, like the old song says, take time to stop and smell the roses and live in gratitude and express gratitude for every breath and every heartbeat. And do what Kenny Matthews would do. Talk on that toy telephone. Prop up your feet and talk all you want to. And in the quiet of the night, just go outside and listen to that joyful noise, that beautiful music coming from across that deep, wide river. And we all recognize that music and that familiar voice. So sing on, Kenny Matthews. Sing on, brother. God bless y'all. Thank you.
You say I'm crazy, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm right off into the night and let my feeling blow. Oh, where my feet say no. just one place I know to stop this longing pain. Think I'll go back again, the Gulf of Mexico. You know I can't leave you alone. Nowhere could ever be home without the one that I love. Just tell me that you'll go. Soft winds are blowing over the bay, brown water flowing takes me away back where I wanna go, the Gulf of Mexico. I'll feel the summer rain fall on my face again, the Gulf of Mexico. I've got a feeling you'll understand. Sunsets for stealing, walk in the sand, and we'll find peace, I know. Our love will grow and grow. Say you'll come back with me down to the southern sea, the Gulf of Mexico. I've got a feeling you'll understand. Sunsets for stealing, walk in the sand, and we'll find peace, I know. Our love will grow and grow. Say you'll come back with me down to the southern sea, the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico.
Had to get my phone out with my notes. My oldest son has the tablet that had it, and he needed to be able to get Minecraft, so it's gonna be a little harder for me to read. I didn't think I was gonna say anything today, not because there wasn't anything to say, but short time to say everything about him, obviously, and I really wasn't sure if I could do him justice or if I could say anything at all. One thing I'll toss out, it's been interesting trying to listen to music of his and catalog it all, get it all together and convert it to MP3 so that we can listen to it and hearing songs that I guess I'd never even realized that was him singing. They were just in the background growing up, or hearing songs that I never heard him sing before and going, wow, that was him? Like, I played a couple of his songs for some friends at work and they were just like, man, this guy's funky. Like, that's your dad? Anyways, so I met my father at a very young age. Growing up him was great. I've got so many good memories of fun times with him. So many of him telling me, if you tell your mother we did this, I'll call you a liar. And for some reason, that was just a threat that I could not deal with. That or being called Stephen. If he called me Stephen, I knew I had done something very wrong and I had better stop whatever it was. I'm sure a lot of y'all know me as Bo. That was the name I gave up when the Bo Don't Know Diddley commercials came out with Bo Jackson and Bo Diddley. So I gave that up. Many of the best memories I have of Dad were of us out fishing or on the water doing other things. Throughout his life, he was always drawn to the Gulf. Obviously, you heard the song there. Whether it was surfing on Dolphin Island or floating around in Little Lagoon with a shrimp on the line hoping for a redfish. It seemed like he was at peace anytime he was on the water. I guess unless there was a storm cooking. And the things that Dad would do on the water were frequently a little sketchy, to say the least. I think Mike and I probably picked up a lot of that ourselves, whether it was going way too far out in the Gulf in a 16-foot tri-hull boat made 20 plus years before I was ever born, or ignoring waterspouts off in the distance, because they had to be pretty far away by his guesstimation. I'm sure he knew exactly how far away they were. Usually once the hair would start standing up on our heads from the lightning striking around, it was probably about time to head on in. I guess unless we were catching something. But, you know, once again, don't tell Mom. It seemed like I spent nearly every day of my childhood from about age 7 to 13 out on the water with Dad. I remember he would pick us up in his box truck and take us up to the boat and go fishing. The coldest day of my life was my birthday. I think I was probably 9 or something like that. Once again, we were living in Tampa, and he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to go fishing." My birthday's 5 days before Christmas. That was not a good idea, but he said, "Okay," and we went and tied up to a bridge across Tampa Bay. I don't think we caught anything except maybe a cold, but a lot of good memories were made. It's still the coldest day of my life. Music was a constant passion for Dad. He was always playing or listening to music. It didn't seem like there was never a moment when there wasn't some music going or he wasn't playing something. Oftentimes he'd play songs that he loved and explain why the song was so good, whether it was a difficult song to play or an extremely talented musician, and I didn't understand any of it. What I did appreciate was his passion for those songs. One story that I'd like to share recently about Dad, and obviously he had his decline over the years. We really didn't know how much he understood of what was going on towards the end, but I remember growing up, and anybody who lived in Atlanta in the 80s or 90s knew that there was only about 3 different movies that TBS would play. One of them was Blues Brothers, and I just thought it was a cool car chase movie with a whole lot of good quotes to it. And Dad would talk about how good these musicians were, and I just kind of assumed that he was talking about, you know, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, all the famous people in that movie, but he would also talk about the band, the Blues Brothers band, and I'm just thinking, these guys are just actors, obviously. It was a few months ago that I found out that the members of the Blues Brothers band were the actual house musicians for Stax Records, which Dad had been signed with in the 70s. And I asked him a couple of months ago, and he was able to tell me that that's why he knew how good those guys were, because he'd played with them. He knew firsthand just how good these guys were. There's so many more stories I'd love to hear from him now, or be able to hear from him now, that I probably ignored as a kid growing up. I didn't understand, I didn't appreciate them. And having 2 boys of my own now, there's so many other questions I wished I could ask him about how he dealt with us, with Mike and I. Hopefully I picked up enough from him to get by with these boys. As an adult, my dad was always there for advice, but more as a friend than anything. Frequent drinking buddy. I probably shouldn't say that in church, but but he was always there for encouragement. He would never say, "Don't do that." He'd say, "Well, that might not be the best idea." He'd try to give some advice. When I told my dad I was thinking of joining the Marines, he said, "Join the Navy, join the Navy," you know. I said, "Dad, I want to stay in Atlanta. I can't join the Navy and stay in Atlanta. There's no boats around here." He was so proud when I walked off the parade deck on Paris Island, a Marine. And he was still proud of me when I went into my first unit assigned to Naval Air Station Atlanta. I wound up on a Navy base one way or another. To his credit, he didn't give me too much crap about that, although it would have been well deserved. He was always so proud and supportive of Mike and I both. He'd give us advice, but in the end, he'd leave us to make our own mistakes and was there to cheer on our successes. Dad always said, don't bother calling me looking for bail money. But the one time I did have to make that call, he did answer. He called me dumb on more than a few occasions as a result, which was well-deserved. But I appreciated him even more for being there when I was at my dumbest. I watched my dad working hard most of his life to make sure that our family was taken care of. His career path changed as my mom's career path changed. He was a musician, a truck driver, a pillow salesman, a mortgage broker, and at times a stay-at-home dad. He did whatever was needed to make sure that we had what we needed. As my dad grew older, he made it clear that he wanted to spend the rest of his life on the Gulf somewhere with my mom. He achieved that goal. In my eyes, I can say that without a doubt, he achieved what he wanted in life, to retire with the love of his life, on the water, with a healthy family around him. Sorry. That's always been my view of success. He succeeded. He won at life. Unfortunately, life doesn't always go the way we plan. Dementia came in slowly with Dad, and his behavior changed in a lot of ways that we didn't understand and didn't realize what was going on. It robbed him of his final years of happiness. It robbed him of his chance to take his grandchildren fishing and to share his love of the water and music with them the way that he would have liked to. I always look forward to him taking my boys out on the water and teaching them how to fish. Sorry. I fully expected him to share a few dirty words, teach them a few dirty words, and for them to learn all the words of Barnacle Bill the Sailor along the way. People used to tell me I was like my dad, and I wore that as a badge of honor growing up. As a little kid, you always look up to your dad. As an adult, though, I came to look up even more to him. He gave my brother and I a set of core values that shaped who we became, and I'm okay with that. Maybe that's made us a little rough around the edges, but I know Dad would understand. That subconscious desire to do what would make Dad proud, I'm sure, has driven me to be the person I am today, and continues to push me now in the hopes that someday my own kids will see me the same way. And hopefully I can live up to that. So, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm Carol's little brother, Richard, but a lot of people call me Bo also. So I'm proud to be Big Bo. Back when I was like 16 years old, my brother was a manager at an apartment complex, Sahara Club. And I used to, thought it was cool. I'd drive the 64 Pontiac up there with a bunch of my high school buddies. And we'd go to the clubhouse and shoot pool. Well then, one night, we could hear music playing in the clubhouse. Went in there, my sister was there, and this long-haired guy with a big, thick mustache had on those used leather pants, and she said, this is Ken. This is my, I guess you could say, boyfriend. And Ernie and Charles, my friends, and Phil, they kind of looked from, they were back in the back. I said, dadgum, I got a hippie for my sister's boyfriend's a hippie. That's cool. And it went on from there. Like they say, he had a bubbly personality. He took to me right from the beginning as we went to see him play at places with First National Band and others. And then he and Carol got married, and my mother got married, I think, the year before, just the year before after our father passed away, to a man from East Alabama up around Goodwater. I don't know if y'all know where Goodwater is. Pell City in that area, Millerville. Alvin W. Kelly, and everybody called him Alabama. He was Alabama all the way. And I'm not talking about Crimson Tide, I'm just talking about he was the epitome of a old Alabama guy. And that's, he was old school. And here my sister had a hippie. They got married a year after. Any of y'all ever watch All in the Family? Any of y'all ever hear of Archie Bunker? Any of y'all ever hear of Meathead? That was Paw and Kenny. I can't call him Ken. That's just too dignified. I have to call him Kenny because he's so bubbly and everything. And but Archie and Meathead really loved each other. They loved each other dearly. And boy, when those two sons were born, he loved him even more because he loved those two boys with all his heart, going out on wagon rides with Midnight. And but it was neat to step back and watch that relationship grow between Kenny and Kelly. When they came back to Georgia, they moved in finally to my grandmother's and grandfather's house up in Fairburn. And I'll never forget, the big thing that happened there was Kenny introduced me to Tony Chicheri's Creole seasoning. But it was put on popcorn very heavily. And we sat out on the back steps and started eating that Tony's popcorn, and my mouth just lit on fire. And I started sneezing, coughing, and choking. And he just turned and grinned at me. Then they left and went to Tampa. Bo was talking about the little boat. I'll never forget, me and one of my friends went down there to visit Carol and Kenny and the boys in Tampa. And he said, I'm going to take y'all fishing. Okay, love it, love to go. We're going to go to Tarpon Springs. We got in that little bitty boat, and I mean, the waves must have been breaking 5 feet. And he said, y'all sit on the front. I got the back. And the waves were just crashing over the bow and just soaking us to death. A big old ship passed us and threw a big wave over us again, over and over, and I'm scared. I am scared to death. And finally Ken says, well, let's go over to the flats and catch some catfish. But he got us there safe, and that was the most important thing. In Gulf Shores, Carol and Ken were so nice. Kenny, I don't know why I said Ken. I never called him Ken. They let me come down and stay with them many times, or they would go off somewhere and let me watch the house. And had many wonderful times here. I loved fishing in the little canal behind their house. And me and Ken would sit out there and just sit and fish and talk. Remember one time, I called him Lowenbraw. That took up after a few years. I don't know if y'all ever heard of the old beer, Lowenbraw. I turned bro-in-law around and called him Lowenbraw. He loved that. But one time went to the Tin Top, listening to him sing, and he was playing. Remember one time the owner's black lab pulled the plug on his amp. He was sitting there singing. Then there was nothing. So after they got the dog off the cord and got him plugged back in, he always told me, he said, I cannot stand singing Margaritaville, but everybody requests it. Margarita, so okay. Then he started playing Margaritaville, and at the end, he said, and it's Richard Bomer's damn fault. Excuse me, Pastor. But I got to calling him Captain Ken when we'd go out in the little lagoon, because, you know, he'd give you directions, and if you got up and wanted to look over on the other side, sit down, keep the boat balanced. Don't let it tip over. But towards Carol had knee surgery, and I knew Kenny was starting to decline just a little bit. And so I went down there to kind of help her and help him. And he was starting to where he wouldn't say much. And it was sad, because he was so outgoing, so fun to be around, so fun to kid around with. And so finally, I said, let's go for a walk. And he said, okay. He didn't have much facial expression, but he could talk with you, and just didn't walk very well. He'd take little short steps, but it took us a long time to walk up West 4th Avenue to 59 and turn back around. Carol said, just get him out of the house for a while. He needs to get out and do something. When we were walking back to the house, he stopped me and he said, I can't stand how I feel right now. He said, I don't even know what my purpose is for being here. And so we stopped and stood in the middle of West 4th Avenue, and I said, well, first of all, you have a legacy. You have 2 sons who are both heroes, first responders, and because of you, there ain't no telling how many lives have been saved. And I actually got a reaction from him. And I said, the music you have played, the joy you have brought to thousands of people, yeah, you had a purpose. You had a purpose, and you used it to the best of your ability. So I couldn't be more proud of 2 nephews. I know who their dad was, and I know that they'll carry on his legacy. A legacy like the time when one of my own was really in tough shape. And Kenny said, we got to do something. And me and Ken and Bo we drove to Valdosta, and we did what we needed to do for my family member, and I don't know where she would be right now if it wasn't for Kenny and Bo. But right now, she's a good mama. So Kenny had a lot of purposes that he didn't realize. And I thank God Kenny was a part of my life because of what he did for me and my daughter.
Well, I don't have to tell you. God did a good thing in Greenwood, Mississippi on August 4th, 1950, when he put Kenneth Matthews on this earth. And I know you already know he was born in Mississippi, graduated from Davidson High School in Mobile. We've heard all about this amazing man and his musical accomplishments, how he served in the U.S. Coast Guard. He was a member of the Mobile Youth Symphony, sought-after trumpet player, and I had the privilege of knowing Ken and Carol after they moved to Gulf Shores or were part of this church for 16 years, and y'all's home was around the corner from my in-laws, right? They were on West 4th, and my in-laws were, at the time, my future in-laws were on West 3rd. Well, they are still there, but they weren't my in-laws then, and so, I'd be in a kayak with the boy that I liked, and we'd be coming around the canal, and Mr. Ken would always be, there, and we'd wave, and he'd be piddling with something, either a boat or fishing, or like, what are y'all doing? Like, nothing. We're just, falling in love. It's fine. They'd be like, you need anything? Because, those trips became frequent, and later on I probably brought a child or two around that corner before they moved. But in my memory, I remember him assimilating into the music ministry here, and I know we never got a full taste of his talents and capabilities, because he was too busy serving in other ways. He served not only as, attending this church and playing acoustic guitar, and I remember he would play, and the one time I remember him singing was for the youth ministry fundraiser where he was sang at a sock hop, and we were like, where have you been? Well, he didn't have any need to let us all know how accomplished he was. He was too busy actually serving. I've been made aware he was not an usher. He would not serve for Carol. Carol's our head usher for many years. No, he preferred the less visible role as safety team member. He was actually safety and security, and I'm told Van McAllister gave him a hard time. Called him Barney Fife, which I'm sure he appreciated. So thanks, Van. He was active in Methodist Men, was always there to help with that Fat Tuesday pancake breakfast, right? He would volunteer when they opened up the thrift store, the Resale Heaven. He would be the person that would take all the stuff that they couldn't fit inside the store and go run it to the Salvation Army or wherever, whatever other ministry needed it. He was happy to do that. But perhaps the most special ministry to him, the one he seemed to have the greatest affinity for, was the food ministry, our bread ministry, that distributes boxes of food weekly to those in need on Thursday mornings. And he was not only a Thursday morning volunteer, but that people don't know how many hours it takes, and it's all volunteers and folks that are passionate to continue this. And he would be one of the ones who would go to the Orange Beach Winn-Dixie and pick up the food they would donate, which you have to do in the days ahead, and then bring it here and store it. And when I think about his life, and especially his time here as we knew him, the only person I knew to call him Kenny was Miss Carol. We all called him Ken. These are the words that come to mind from the prophet Micah. He has shown you, oh man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. I believe that Ken Matthews was a man known by his family and friends and church family as a man who had great talent and ability, but who didn't need to earn anyone's recognition. He didn't move here or go anywhere to make a name for himself, but to humbly serve God with who he was, his hands, his voice, in his family, in his church, wherever he was. And that's what he did as long as his health enabled him to. And surely this is an example for all of us to follow, asking, what does the Lord require of me? The Lord requires of me to worship him with my heart, soul, mind, and strength, love my neighbor as myself, and to look for ways to do good and to act justly and love mercy and walk humbly with my God the way Ken Matthews did until the day he calls us home. Let us pray. Our great and loving God, we worship you today for all you've done for us and will continue to do in and through our lives, and we thank you for the life and witness of this great man, of your servant, Ken, who is now healed and whole and fully alive in your glorious presence. So as we remain on this side of heaven, would you send your Holy Spirit to comfort and to keep this family and these friends in the days ahead? May your peace that passes all understanding be theirs in the deepest part of their being, so that as the waves of emotions come and go, a deep, abiding sense of your presence would remain constant. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. In just a moment, I'm going to ask you to stand and I'll give a benediction. And after the family processes out, they've invited everyone. You're invited to our auditorium is across the parking lot, and there is a reception. There's lots of food and refreshments waiting there for anyone who would love to come and join the family. So, yes, let's stand up. Let me ask you to stand. And will you receive this blessing and then hold off until the family has made it out before you exit. Now as you go, may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you and give him your peace. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
I'm not scared of dying, and I don't really care if it's peace you find in dying. Well then, let the time be near. If it's peace you find in dying, and then dying time is near, just bundle up my cloth, 'cause it's cold way down there. Hear that it's cold way down there, yeah, crazy cold way down there. And when I die and when I'm gone, there'll be one child born in this world to carry on, to carry on.